We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
She's Vice President of Quality and Delivery with EVG Consulting and is an expert in business as a business analyst, facilitator, coach, and trainer. She's also co-author of the book with Ellen Gottesdiener on Discover to Deliver, Agile Product Planning and Analysis. So, Mary, come on up and thank you very much.
I'd like you to self-organize into teams of 4 or 5, whether these folks with these 4 people would turn and form a little team, and 4 or 5, 6 people, we need 12 teams. 6 teams here, 6 teams there. So see what you can do, and Ellen will give a responsible party on that team who stands up and announces this is their team. She'll hand them a little packet. All right, great. Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. I was here a couple years ago in this facility with you all, and I was here a couple years ago before that, Agile Games, and had a great time. I will try to be careful with my speech. I moved to South Carolina 5 years ago after living in Connecticut, so I'm picking up some colloquial terms, and sometimes Ellen will say to me, "What did you say?" So please, if you need an interpretation, let me know. We will be giving away copies of our books. Ellen and I wrote Discover to Deliver, and I have 2 other books, Ellen's first and second book. They're here. Slide these down. And if you'd like to go in the raffle, please put your business card in this, just pass it around, and we'll have a drawing at the end. If you don't have a business card, a slip of paper will work. And if anyone's tweeting tonight, you can get me at MB Gorman. So what I'm interested in knowing is how you capture the idea of value. So if you have some backlog items, whether it's a feature, a story, a minimum marketable feature, a minimum viable product, whatever those things are in your backlog, what format do you use? How do you recognize the value? Now some people, and we'll do a show of hands, some people actually use the standard format as a user role. I need to do some action, so, and then the value statement. How many folks use that particular approach? Okay? And some folks actually start with the value proposition right up front. They swap the order. The third thing becomes the first thing. Anyone use that? And could you share why you use that, Nancy?
Well, sometimes I flip it around because having the insight about their bigger context helps you bring other things you might know into the conversation.
So it's not forgotten. Sometimes when folks are writing these, they sort of get tired after the I need and then don't ever get around to the so with the value proposition. So it's a good reminder. Are there any other ways you could share that you actually define that value and publicly share that? Any other formats you might use? Okay. Well, what I'd like you to do in your team, you have a little packet, and there are a couple of things in that packet. One are 2 pieces of paper that are stapled together, and let me explain what those are. The first one is around any tools or techniques you currently use to define value for your backlog items. And I'd be interested in you chatting in your team about those tools and techniques to enable you to make decisions and be able to plan. So if you, in your team, if you could just spend a couple of minutes sharing, and if someone could be our writer and capture that, and please write neatly and large, so someone other than your mother could read it, okay? So 3 minutes sharing those ideas and writing them down.
Just this first page.
Yes, and you have about, let's try to get as many things as possible, and we'll be sharing those shortly. Thank you. Stand up, actually, one person from each group, stand up, please. Brave people, yes, thank you. Okay.
Good job.
Eric, could you share Just one item from your sheet.
Attribute value matrix.
Attribute value matrix. Thank you. Sit down.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Competitive analysis. Thanks.
Conversations with users, stakeholders, sales, marketing, developers.
Okay, so conversations with a number of. Excellent. Thank you. Yes.
Well, we talked about tools like Jira.
Jira.
A whole bunch of tools of that sort.
Okay. Thank you.
Buy a feature.
Buy a feature. Thank you. Over here.
Projected sales volume.
Projected sales volume.
ROI projection.
ROI projections.
Customer polling, Salesforce, customer service, support desk, gives a lot of.
Okay, I'm sorry. Could you say the first part again quickly?
Customer polling,
Customer polling. Thank you.
Value type, revenue generator, cost savings, compliance, or loss aversion.
Okay, so is that all one thing? I was like, I'm not familiar with that.
4 things under value.
4 things. Okay, could you give us the first one a little?
Revenue generator, cost savings,
Okay. All right.
compliance.
Thank you.
Loss aversion.
All right. Thank you.
Eisenhower matrix, or Covey calls it the urgency importance matrix.
Okay. Thank you. She didn't need anyone to repeat. And how about our team right here?
Eisenhower matrix.
I apologize. The Eisenhower matrix.
Cost benefit analysis.
Okay. CBA. Thank you. And did we get everyone? Yes? We're all set. Okay, well, you have a second sheet, and what I'd ask you to do is to identify, just on this sheet, who are the folks that would actually participate in making value decisions on your team. And it doesn't, actually, I prefer not to be a name. I don't want to hear about Harry or Mabel. I'd prefer to hear who they represent. So whether it was from someone from marketing or someone from whatever area. So this is a quicker one. You have about 90 seconds to quickly note, just call them out, and your wonderful person writing them down will capture those. Thank you.
To know the cost. Yeah.
Let's take the approach where anyone that has a name they'd like to share from this team, could you just holler it out? You don't have to stand. The customer is going to be a decision maker. Over here.
Everyone, by consensus.
Everyone by consensus. Another.
Marketing.
Marketing. Product manager. Product owner. Over here.
There you are.
Sponsor.
Sponsor.
Field support.
Field support. Was that what you were laughing about, Norman?
No.
Would you like to share what you were laughing about?
Finance.
Oh, finance. Okay, thank you. Back here. CEO.
Executive sponsor.
Executive sponsor.
Users.
Users. Okay. COO. Okay. Now, I'd love someone on the team to adopt this stapled set of papers, because we're going to come back to it afterwards when we are wrapping, and I'd prefer it not to get lost. You can spill food on it, that's okay, but please just don't lose it. All right. So I was just really, in a sense, trying to poll you. Where are you? What are you doing? Because what we really want to be able to do is to have a pretty deep conversation about value, this often misunderstood concept. We want to be talking about how we value options. I'd like to share with you a framework that we use for valuing, and then we'll have a quick wrap. So some of you may be familiar with the book Ellen and I published recently, Discovering to Deliver. And what we've done with this book around agile product planning and analysis is to focus on a product. And we use this image of a box, and we'd like to fully attribute the source of that image. It's from a book many of you may be familiar with, Business Model Generation. How many folks are familiar with that? Wonderful book. And the imagery, we just found this very evocative, to be able to think that the product that we participate in creating, maybe it represents a software, it could represent a service, it could represent a device of some sort. Our goal is to be able to represent that, understand that particular aspect, and use this and think about, well, I don't know about you, I started out around a few hundred years ago as a programmer, and the products we created, we didn't put a ribbon around them. We didn't tie them up prettily. And so the idea is, what we need to do is to get a better understanding so we are delivering this high-value product. And maybe wrap a ribbon around it because it's so nice. We also recognize that this ongoing activities of discover what those product needs are in order to deliver them. So we discover some needs, we deliver those, and often what happens is we come back around and the product is going to be enhanced. We progressively elaborate the product, so we go through this discover to deliver again. We're on this almost like this infinity type aspect. So the continuous flow of value delivery is what we recognize is our calling to do agile work. So looking at this discover, when do we discover value? Sometimes we don't discover it until after we deliver it, and the reason we discover it because it's missing. Someone says, you didn't deliver what we needed. So what I'd like to focus on for this evening is around discovery. How can we use our discovery techniques to be able to understand that value early on? So we like to think that there are the ends that we recognize, and these are the anticipated needs, the anticipated value that we want to be able to provide. So a product would have a vision, some expectation that in the future, whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now, this would be what we would actually have as a product. And then the idea that that vision is going to be amplified by many goals. And those goals, again, are a higher level view, certainly specific enough compared to the vision, but a goal might be in the next X number of period of time, we want to increase sales by some percent. The objective can even be more finely tuned, and we can have those, and ideally they would be SMART objectives. So having a vision, goals, and objectives are what we hope to achieve. And the way we would achieve that is through the means, the product itself. We'll deliver those particular goals and objectives. So we have the means in our product box, and sometimes there's a disconnect. Sometimes the product does not deliver what we had hoped to have. So looking at this idea of the ends, hopefully, will be achieved through those means. In addition to the vision, goals, and objectives, we know we should also be aware of what would be the benefits of the product and being very clear on those benefits. And the benefits could be some sort of increased financial gain. There could be the benefits, when we look at some intangible benefits, there could be aspects around saving lives if you're building a product. We have a particular client that builds diabetes meters. And of course, we have to think about the cost to actually create this product. The other aspects are around risks. What might go wrong or would constrain us from reaching that particular set of goals and objectives? And then, of course, there are dependencies. Now, when we think about dependencies, this is pretty tricky because dependencies can be about the product itself. One feature of the product is dependent upon another feature. There can also be project-like dependencies, that we're dependent on another project team, we're dependent upon getting sufficient resources. These dependencies could be internal to us as an organization. There can be external dependencies. We're dependent upon getting certain aspects or certain regulations from the government. We are, and we're working with a client right now, a healthcare client, and you know the chaos out there right now in the healthcare area. And so can we move forward with our product until we know what those particular regulations would be? We're dependent on that. Another aspect that will affect our decision making is around views, and we like to use the telescope to be able to think about. There's the big view, which is looking at our product out across possibly a couple of years. There could be the preview, and again, these may be calibrated to your team itself, but the preview, we like to think of it as about maybe 2 months or a little more further out. And then the now view, like right now, what is it that we are actually going to focus on building and delivering? So the idea of the big view, the preview, and the now view, all of these, again, are a way to shape our understanding of that product. What I'd like to use tonight is a little case study, and it's built around Agile 2014. And you may say, wait a second, we haven't even had Agile 2013 yet. Well, I'm sure that the organizers of the Agile conferences are already thinking about that, and I think I saw where they're having a meeting soon about preparing for Agile 2014. So this little case that I'd like to use with you will be based on the fact that you'll be thinking in your team, I know you've already started bonding, so you get to work with these folks again, you'll actually start thinking about value for this particular product. They want to have a world-class portal that provides a broad array of resources to serve all conference participants. So that's their, in essence, their vision. This is where they want to go. In order to understand that vision, it's important that we consider who are these stakeholders. Ellen and I prefer to call these product partners. And I'd like to walk through these quickly with you. Certainly would like to think about who the customer is, who will actually use the product. And they are very much around, it could be a person who's using a product, but it could also be another system. It doesn't have to necessarily be a person. And the people representing that system would be a customer. The business itself, who would sponsor the product. And then, of course, there's the technology staff. And the idea that these folks are interdependent in trying to understand the product, to be able to, in essence, elicit those requirements, make decisions, and then actually build the product and deliver it. So this concept of a partnership is all about collaboration. And we'll see throughout the evening, they will have to be oftentimes exploring what their needs are, and there may be conflicts. The customers want one thing, the business is not interested in that, or vice versa. So again, looking at this partnership, recognizing this in aspect of interdependent. The customer is dependent upon the business to build the product, the business is dependent upon the customer to use the product, and of course there's IT and their very important role. So just quickly, imagining who the partners might be for this Agile 2014 portal. And we've got a list of folks here, and in your packet, each team, this is why we have 12 teams, each team, I'd like you to just raise your hand when we get to this person. Do we have a team that's going to represent the attendee? Where's the attendee team? Here's the attendee team. And this would be somebody who's actually going to get to go to the conference or would like to go to the conference. So you'll be thinking about those folks. How about the media rep? Okay, so Norman's team, the media rep, this would be somebody, whether it's Better Software or some other publication or some other channel that is interested in learning more and has certain needs of that portal itself. How about the speakers? Who's the speaker table? Somebody has a sheet that says speaker? Yes, hopefully we didn't lose the speakers. I don't think we'll have a conference without speakers.
There's a speaker over here.
Yay, the speakers, okay. Woo. Oh, that's interesting. So they have two roles? Okay, Ellen, if you could figure that one out. So we have speakers who are users of this portal. How about the sponsor? Okay, so sponsors are those wonderful organizations that help pay for certain aspects. In turn, they want to get some recognition for that. How about the, I'm trying to read quickly here, the reviewers. The review team. So when the speaker submits a proposal, there are reviewers who need to use the portal for a variety of reasons. Thank you. And then volunteers. Can't live without those volunteers. They want to be able to use the portal. How about the business perspective? These would be the folks such as the Agile Alliance chairperson. Over there, they probably want to use the portal. The conference chair itself. I think that's Kent McDonald this year, yeah? So who has the conference chair sheet? Oh, thank you very much. And I'm sure that's important for that person to have their voice heard around the product needs. The program chair. Okay, so there are multiple program chairs, and again, what are their needs for this particular portal? The venue coordinator. Those folks in Nashville this year, I've forgotten where it is next year. Is it Austin? I think Austin, Texas next year. So who would actually represent that? Thank you. And then we have the IT or technology staff. We've got the conference IT staff, yay, okay, over here. And then we might have an integrator. An integrator might be through some financial system that has to be done when people are paying for their registration. And who is the integrator IT team? Thank you very much. So imagine, these are the partners. They need to be able to work together to discover the product needs as well as to deliver them. So looking at this, when we think about value, oh my goodness, we have 12 perspectives possibly on value. So here's a definition. I'll be quiet for a second and let you read. So it's always helpful to have a definition, but it may be a little dry, so let's make it a little juicier. Value, when we think of it, it could be tangible value, things that you can actually measure, and then there are intangible values, things like possibly brand loyalty. How would you measure that? Then when we think about value, desirable value. Desirable that people would actually want to use this product. They would find it appealing. And then there's feasibility. When we think about the feasibility of a product and the value it provides, is it feasible for us to build this product based upon certain constraints? So value is multifaceted. Sometimes it helps, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the 5 whys. Anyone here use the 5 whys? Okay. Could you share why, Josh? What's the value of using 5 whys?
Sometimes you have to keep asking why in order to get to the real root reason of the person's asking for something.
The root cause, the root reason, we keep asking because many times, folks, the presenting topic is not really what the underlying issue or need is. Absolutely, thank you. So what we're going to explore for probably about another 15, 20, 30 minutes is around value considerations. And this is something that Alan and I have used in building this business value model, which is what we advertised in the talk. We're going to build this model together with you. And what I want you to see is that we're going to consider what are these variables that would be used in order to make a decision. Because we want to focus our energies on high value product options. And in order to do that, we need to represent what are those considerations that those various partners have. So thinking about a value consideration, typically when we're working with clients, when we first do this work, folks who aren't familiar with it yet start listing features. So a feature, yes, we all have a definition of a feature, and an example of a feature in this case might be, we want the product, someone wants to be able to compare prices. That's a feature of the product. And if we take the approach of asking 5 whys, if we ask, well, why, ask the user, why do they want to compare prices? Can I ask you, Josh, if this feature was of interest to you, why would you want to compare prices?
Because I don't want to spend too much on what it is.
He doesn't want to spend too much money. Well, why don't you want to spend too much money?
My colleagues would, or my peers would make fun of me for wasting money.
Oh, and why would they make fun of you?
Because think they're very wise and make better choices, I guess.
Okay, so he has this image that, you know, he doesn't want to be embarrassed. Well, one way we could phrase that, maybe that's Josh's view of things. Thank you for being so honest and open.
No problem.
But when we take that and ask that question, what we may find out is that someone looking at that, they're cost conscious. So that's the value consideration. It's not the compare prices, that's the feature. But digging down deeper, learning more about those value considerations. And we're going to have an exercise in just a few minutes about that. So I want you to be careful as you do this work. When you are thinking about your role, whether you're the reviewer, whether you're the Agile Alliance chair, you're trying to get inside their head, and sometimes you get inside their heart. Some of these value considerations are not numerical. Some of them, I mean, look at what Josh shared with us, right? Thinking about that aspect, he didn't want to actually be embarrassed or made fun of by his colleagues because he didn't compare prices. Where do you work? That's so scary, I'm not sure. So this idea, do you imagine that these 12 different partners that we've called out, do you think they all have the same value considerations? Do you think they're all going around singing Kumbaya and saying, oh yeah, we all agree? Absolutely not. So what we're trying to do is to surface those, be clear on what they are, and be respectful when we are trying to consider how we would use those to make value decisions. So it might be the customer is interested in convenience. Other customers might be more interested in cost. Others might be looking for speed. The business perspectives, we heard one great example earlier about ROI, the market fit. Time to market might be very important. Any delay in getting to market could have serious implications, so that's a value consideration. And then certainly from technology consideration would be, are we ready to be able to utilize that particular technology? What would be the cost of that? What's the efficiency of that hardware, software environment? And certainly, is it testable? So right off the bat, you can see these are unique. I do want to pause for a second and share a story about this. And it's the idea that when we look closely and have a safe environment where people can share what these truly mean to them. The example of a recent client workshop that we did, it happened to be with an insurance company in the Midwest. And they were concerned that they had users for this particular product who had to understand if they had taken training in order to be licensed to write insurance in a particular state. Every state has unique requirements for training for certain insurance products. And the user, the agent who was using this software, wanted to be able to quickly understand what were the requirements to write and what training was available, so if they had a potential juicy contract they could write, could they get the training for that state in time. So that was their interest, to make sure that they could write the contract and get their commission. Well, the business perspective, the managing general agent, who did not use the software, that person was concerned about penalties. The company could actually pay penalties if it was found that an agent wrote a contract in a state they weren't licensed in. They also had a value consideration of PR. It would be bad public relations if it were known that these agents were not, in fact, legitimately licensed. So think about the business perspective, their considerations, and then the user, the writing agent. And they really weren't in sync for some period of time. And it took a little bit of time working together to make sure that the product would fit both those needs. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to go back to your team, and you have a worksheet. Could someone hold that worksheet up so everyone knows we've got one? And on that worksheet is the title of your role, and there's some space there for you to think about what might be the value considerations. So you'll have some examples. I'll put this slide back up, possibly to trigger some thoughts. I'd ask you to spend 4 minutes working with your group and trying to think, get inside their head, remember inside their heart too, about what they might value about this Agile 2014 portal. Okay, is everyone clear? What did you find? Was this easy to do?
No.
Why not? Why was it not, and did anyone find it easy? Who found it easy? And why did you find it easy?
Because we had the venue, and everybody's been at meetings, and we just kept up coming with one idea after another. And we've got about 20 items here almost.
Okay, would you mind sharing one?
One of these ideas,
Mhm.
travel and discounts, number of potential attendees,
Okay.
meeting rooms, et cetera, et
Okay,
cetera.
what's the value?
The value? We didn't go down that far. We just got.
Okay. All right, so,
The underlying value is being able to get information both to people and from people about needs, about the needs for the setting up the venue, and from people.
well, why? Those are features. They want to be able to pull information from the product. Why do they need that?
So that we know what items to arrange. for.
Why do you need to know that?
To accommodate the individual needs of both the planning of the people at the meeting as well as the people who are coming to the meeting.
Great, and why do you want to have efficient, effective planning?
So that it works.
It works, and you're successful, your reputation, it's a lot around reputation. If you aren't prepared, people are going to go home and they talk about what a negative experience they had. So this is challenging to separate features from value considerations. How about we share a couple more?
So we can win the venue coordinator of the year award.
Oh, they want to win an award. And that's their value consideration. In order to do that, they have to do all these good things. Okay, thank you.
We had a couple from our IT conference IT. One was registration connection being timely, so that you can get registrations and collect dollars easily.
Okay.
Make it easy for the register.
That's a great one, John. IT wants to have an efficient, timely connection for registration. Now, is that just IT's value? Who also would have that share that value?
Attendees.
Almost everybody, right? Because if that doesn't happen, that's a shared value.
And we have another one, the feedback from 2013, so we know whether we need to change things for 2014.
So that's a feature. They want to be able to go and get this, and the reason they want to get that data is so they can improve. Their value is to progressively improve. They don't want to find out too late. So wow, with more time, and maybe a little more nagging, right? Sometimes it takes that nagging to get to that point that we really get down into the value considerations. Now, sometimes it goes two ways. Sometimes you hear a feature and you ask, Joshua will tell you, ask why 5 times, and you might get down to that point, which I do with a few teams. Sometimes you get value considerations, and those lead you to discover features. So it can go either way. But I think the important thing is to recognize the difference, and I'll just back up. Let me get back here. Please remember this slide. The difference between a feature and value considerations. Okay? Please, you had a question?
So how do you know when you're at the end of the W chain?
How do you know that you're in when you can stop asking another why question? Anyone?
Ask your 3-year-old.
Yeah, to be a 3-year-old. Yeah?
Start to get the same answer.
You might get the same answer. Others?
Sometimes you end up talking about a basic human motivation, like a feeling, really. It's kind of the root of a lot of these things.
Absolutely. Okay,
I'm
please.
concerned you're going down too far and just reduces to absurdum, such as be successful. I mean, I'm concerned that when you go why, you just end up with, well, I just want to get it to work, be successful. Something just as that doesn't provide any value because it's just a tautology.
That can be, but I would ask the question, what does it mean to be successful? And I think it takes a finessing to be able to do this without ticking somebody off, but it also is very powerful. And there are many other tools you can use. You don't always have to ask why 5 times. But let's not forget that many times decisions are made based on hardcore data, supposedly, and we don't always get the result we want. Many times there are these intrinsic values that we don't discover early enough. Okay? All right, so let's keep moving. Here's an example of a workshop we've done, and it's intended to be blurry so you can't read the stuff, right? But what we do is when we build this is very transparent. We have often small groups, cross-functional groups sitting together, being able to explore and elicit what those value considerations are, and then they're openly communicated. And as we move along, we'll see that we use these repeatedly. Someone will be over here making a decision or having a conversation about some aspect of the product, and many times they'll walk back here and study these different value considerations and try to consider how those would actually impact that particular decision for a particular aspect of the product. All right, let's move along now and start thinking about valuing some options. So this is part of the value model. I'm building it with you slowly, but I'm also hiding over here the ends. What was in the ends, anyone remember?
Visions, goals, objectives.
Excellent. So there was a vision, goals, and objectives. Now what I'd ask you to focus on is the fact that that box has now disappeared, and what we're looking at is our product would include one or more product options. Now, product options, we define those as possibilities or capabilities of the product. We aren't necessarily just saying they're features, they could be almost anything. But an option is an option until a decision is made. So what we're going to do is to think about the fact that we have to make choices about what would be in that product. We can't deliver everything, so exploring these product options. And the way we do that is through what we call the 7 product dimensions. Has anyone seen this lineup before? Okay, I won't put you on the spot to share that, Eric, but I'll just quickly go over that. There's always a user for a product, and the user could be a person or another system. There's the interface that's needed for the user to actually interface with the product itself. There are actions. These actions are typically people think of them as verbs, or they might call them processes. Actions like someone might want to register at the conference. There's data that would have to be stored in the product, things about the particular program itself, the details about the schedule, all types of data. Then the stop sign represents controls. And controls are those things that need to be enforced, such as policies or business rules. And there might be rules around what are acceptable methods of payment for a registration. And then we have the environment. The environment, notice it's sort of like a vice grip on the product box, but it also could represent what? What does that also sort of look like? A question mark, okay? So the question mark is what environment is used by the developers, or what hardware and software they're using, the environment for the product itself, as well as the environment that the user is in. So if we think about the person who is registering, where would they be registering? And so that environment of where they would actually use the product. And then we have the quality attributes, often called the ilities, things like testability, scalability, usability. So the question is, when you're looking at product options, are you looking at those options holistically? Are you exploring and evaluating all 7 dimensions? Now, I should have paused earlier. I apologize, because I did not give you a clear idea other than the fact that you had this Agile 2014 portal, and that the idea was it had to be ready in time, and I didn't tell you when it needs to be released, the first release. And that first release is going to be August 2013. And you can imagine why they would want that portal ready. So when people leave the conference, they have the new 2014 portal, they entice people, right? Oh, come back next year. So in thinking about that, what I wanted to be clear here And that's probably at the preview level. They're looking out from here, May till August. When would they be ready to actually deliver that first release? The granularity of these 7 dimensions changes. At the big view, you use all 7 dimensions, but it's at a very high level. At the preview, it's much more precise. At the now view, it's going to be at a testable level. So if we take the stop sign as an example, at the big view, you may know that there are regulations that would have to be enforced by this product. At the preview, you may actually start framing business rules to support those policies. At the now view, those rules need to be atomic testable rules. So you can see that at each point, at each view, you're looking at these 7 dimensions in a much more granular, finely defined way. Some people would choose to call these 4 dimensions functional. So the user, the action, the data, and the control, meaning implementation independent, that business rule must be enforced regardless of how you choose to enforce that from a technology perspective. The other 3 are often called the non-functional, and I personally dislike that word. You know, it's really a nasty word. So thank you, big thumbs down, absolutely. So looking at these, we prefer to take a more neutral approach and call these the 7 product dimensions. This is an example of a recent workshop where we take the 7 dimensions and we take the symbols and we put them on the wall, and the business folks and the customers and the technology are working together. Usually there might be 8 or 9 people from those communities together exploring what those options are across those dimensions. And they're using their value considerations to make certain decisions. So you can see the value considerations are here, and this is sort of truncated. We have obviously control, environment, and quality attribute. And what's going to happen is decisions are made. So I might have all of these action options. What's going to happen? Can I deliver them all in that time frame? And the answer is probably no. So we have to go and consider these these considerations, and as a group make a decision. And normally it's the product owner or product champion, as we prefer to term it, will be there with their marker and starring the items that they feel would be appropriate for that next planning horizon. So looking across these, what they'll do is they then assemble a cohesive set of these options. I'm going to pause for a second. So imagine you need to have your value considerations, ideally beforehand. You look for all of these options to be able to discover what those possibilities are, and then the tough part comes. How do you decide? So looking at that, and we'll talk as we move along just a little bit, there are certain things around decision rules that are necessary. So I'm going to pause and see, does anyone have any questions about this? Please.
So my question was going to be, for these options, when is the option selected and by whom? With one possibility is you deliver all the options to the customer, they're all in the software, you select it at the keyboard or something. And another thing is, these are options selected by the planning team before they start development, or various in-between things. So what were you thinking of for when the option is selected and by whom?
So David, when the options are selected, if you're in a traditional environment, you'd select everything and do the Big Bang approach. A year from now, or 2 years from now, or something like that.
And if you were me, you deliver all the options and let the user pick.
Well, the user is involved. Remember, the user or user representatives are in this planning session, and they are very clearly defining what it is that they value now. They recognize they're not going to get it all. Okay, it's just impossible to get it all. So by August, remember, we already have a date. We can't do all of these options by August. So the when is, we know in an agile environment, we're constantly making decisions. And the ability at this moment to say those are the right choices, The second part, I believe, of your question was, who will make those decisions? Any other, please?
Does it make a difference whether you're setting up this portal from scratch or whether you're updating the 2013 portal?
You'd still have to examine all 7 dimensions. That's a great question. This works whether it's greenfield, whether it's brownfield, whether it's an enhancement. We found that this works in all cases. What you do is have a clear understanding of the state of the existing product. If there are things that would be replaced, things that you drop, that would be important to have that assessment done as you would move forward. Yes?
What are these things that are appearing on that big strip chart there? For example, under interface, is it mobile device, desktop device?
It would be, these would be, actually we've used a context diagram here. Some of you are familiar with that. And those arrows themselves are the interfaces. That's the first question. Those are all options. And then exactly what you said. We'd look at each one of those interfaces and say, what are the options for delivering that interface? So here are the possibilities, as you mentioned.
So can I ask a little follow-up?
Sure.
So on the data, I don't think of data as being necessarily something that gets delivered. I mean, a user is not, the user is usually interested in data in order to support some capability, creation of some value. They're not going to be interested in, for example, all my customers' addresses, or my customers' phone numbers, or my customers' congressional districts or something. They're going to be interested in doing something that the designers are then going to find, oh, we better keep the user's address around in order to surface it at this point. And data seems less something that you'd really be talking about and be a consequence of having made other decisions.
Well, actually, the order of these was not frivolous when we made the decision to put these in the order. So we start over here and we look for our users and we list those possible user options and we select the high value user. Then we think about, they would interface with the product, what actions would that user require? And then what data is necessary for those actions. Now, I will point out my wonderful colleague Sue Burke is here, and Sue is was always, for the last 20-some years that we've worked together, the data queen. She was always my data queen. And she knows that if you're doing a business intelligence project or data warehousing project, you might start with a data dimension to understand, but then you quickly survey the other 6. They would have to understood. So what queries would I need for that data? So I love to talk a lot more about this, but I just wanted to give you a flavor for how this would work because you have some work to do in a minute. Imagine a group of people did some work, maybe while everyone else was eating, there were some folks in the kitchen doing some analysis, and they came up with this list of possibilities. These would be assembled from those options. You pick the high-value options, you assemble them into some cohesive thing. Now, some people might call these a story. Some people might call them an epic. Some of these are big, chunky things because we're looking at the preview. All right, we're not at the now view. These would have to be sliced further at the now view. But first, before we do that, we don't want to have all these little tiny little stories in the backlog. We want to be able to make decisions first about what's the bigger, chunkier thing. If that's higher value, then we'll slice it. So looking at these are all options. These are possibilities. You can see managing the speaker, submission, the community forum, and so forth. And what we're thinking about when we look at this, this is another part of the value model, that we take those product options and we assess them using those value considerations. And once we take those value considerations, that's not it. We're not done. We also have to think about risks, benefits, dependencies, costs, all so we can come up with a value decision. So you can see how these things fit together. They feed each other. And it's challenging because this is a balancing act. You've got the different value considerations, and you told me that all 12 representatives here for the Agile 2014 portal probably don't all agree on the same value considerations. And then you got the benefits to factor in. And you're thinking about the costs. You're thinking about risks and dependencies. This is intense, and you got to do it quickly. So taking these, what we've also done for your exercise is we narrowed down some value considerations. So if I could get a little help to pass these out. Each team gets one. Thank you, David. I'm going to grab some and pass them over here. And your job is to take on the top of the sheet please grab one per team, pass them back.
People raise their hand.
You're to take these value considerations, and if you have a favorite value consideration from the prior exercise, you're certainly welcome to add that. And I'd like you to then assess these particular options. So this is back in your team. I'll leave this particular slide up. You've got it, ideas, and I'd like you to name someone on the team now who would be the final decision maker. Please raise your hand. You have the marker. If there are any extras, can we pass them up? Wrap it up and like to share. Have you share a little bit? People are still energized about it, looks like. Was this easy to do?
Easier.
Easier? Why was it easier? Excuse me. I know you're excited. Why might it have been easier? What made it easier?
Considerations were written out.
The value
And
considerations
that was hard before.
Okay, it was hard digging
Once you had it.
out those value considerations. And Peter?
You mentioned August, and it's clear that some of these things are only needed as you get closer to the date.
Oh yeah, so understanding that date is really important, and yet even looking at some of these, some of the teams had this idea that submit conference evaluations still might be valuable. Why? Any team? Why might you want to include this in the August 2013 release of the 2014 portal?
So you know what you did well and not well for 2013, so you can do a better job for 2014.
Absolutely, but what if the existing portal already has that evaluation feature? We didn't know. Right? So again, it goes to that excellent question that was raised earlier. Do we have these existing features? Are they replacing or are they brand new? Okay, so this gets a little tricky. What else about this? Any other impressions? Please.
Show the importance of getting the value considerations right. Because if you make mistakes there, everything that follows is going to be botched. We have some disagreement with leaving out, like the way we looked at this, register attend doesn't actually resonate with any of these particularly. But from a point of view, is if you don't handle that, you're not going to have anybody at the conference. So maybe that has to do with your date. But anyway, that raised the argument about the whole. This is really important to get this right, because if you don't, then all this is going to not going to be so helpful.
And the gesture for those folks behind the polo view, that this part was the value considerations at the top is getting it right. And it's also, it's not just getting these right, it's making sure that we're listening to all the different partners. That IT has a voice and can communicate. Much of this is around learning. The business is learning from IT. IT is learning from the business. They're all learning from the customer or the customer representatives. So that learning that can take place during discovery is so powerful. It often is a way to eliminate waste. We don't want to build something that isn't highly valued, but we often don't have effective means of knowing what the value is. Okay, so any lessons from this that you'd take?
Simply a question again. I mean, when we went through this, we just had time to go through the group and value which of these we regarded highly, and came to a decision on that. We couldn't really have time to pull the top of that into our awareness. So what was the top of it meant for?
The top of it is the foundation. And we were set up to fail tonight. because none of us are really those roles. Or maybe some of us have been speakers or submitting something, or we've been volunteers, but those other roles, we don't have any visibility into the Agile Alliance chair. So it really brings forth the idea that we, again, it goes back to, are we clear on who are the partners for this product? Are they able to communicate in a shared way? And once they have that understanding, this goes quite quickly. But you can see what happens, and I can just tell you a quick story. Working with a team recently, we got the group together and there was a problem. IT didn't have a warm and fuzzy relationship with the business. And business was really upset with IT. So we go in to do a facilitated workshop. Oh yay, I can't wait, right? And the result after 4 hours was the fact that these folks were at the wall working together. And when we did a little mini retro right after lunch to try to gauge what we'd do the rest of the afternoon, the business folks were very clear. They said to IT, you don't know the business. You're holding us back. We expect you to know the business. And IT was like, well, we've never had the opportunity. You're always too busy. So it became clear they needed to have that understanding, that transparent way of communicating about those value considerations. And then IT had its chance to say, look, you haven't slowed down, so we can share with you some of the newer technology we think would be really powerful in this new version of the product. So these conversations do require those parties to have a safe environment to communicate. And with a team that does work together, as I said, this is sort of a foundation. It keeps growing. I will say, I heard this recently, a person named Dr. James Brown, James T. Brown, he's not James Brown, he made the case that he believes that value does not change. Once you define value, and I asked him about that after, and think about some of those intrinsic values. If the customer is concerned about their reputation, or the business is concerned about their reputation and also complying with regulatory aspects, will that change next month, next year? Some of these value considerations don't change, but many of them could because of market conditions. So you have to be prepared. These you have to keep them fresh. Give them some oxygen once in a while, review them, revisit them. But again, they do become a powerful foundation. Okay, I'm going to have to move a little more quickly, but you can see where these decisions, again, we think we've done a lot of good work. Well, let's not forget, the value decision has to be aligned with the vision, goals, and objectives. So I want to move quickly through a couple of framework items. Remember that continuous flow of value. You can see we're using these value considerations during discovery. You built your product, and they also provide a way to do your validation. We like to use this image, and no, it's not a piece of pizza. These little nuggets are options. And when we think about when we actually discover product options, we even like to have a filter. We're not looking for a big, lumpy, chunky backlog. We're looking for a lean and mean backlog. So before something even goes in the backlog, we should have some value decision on, do we care about it for whatever that planning horizon might be, or one step further. And when we do pull something from the backlog in order to deliver it, it's because we have those value considerations that are guiding us. Of course, when we find those high value options, we need to be able to figure out, well, that when and why. Excuse me, when and what and when. And so thinking about that date, I walked around to a couple folks, let's not forget, we have to deliver something August 2013. So that's going to help frame our when. And the image we use here, you can think about these as possibly internal releases, or some folks may call them iterations. But the end game here is what can you fit in the queue between now and August 2013. And of course, you could possibly have a persona that you're serving. You could have a theme for that particular release, and it's framed around those values. From Ellen's first book, Requirements by Collaboration, there are a number of patterns in the back. And this one I find especially important when we start talking about value considerations. How do we decide? Decide how to decide. We need to know some process in place. We need to have decision rules. We need to be very clear that these rules are done and who participates in them and how do they participate. And there's quite a bit more about that. I don't have time to get into it now, but great resources there. And that is on our website on www.ebgconsulting.com. All the patterns are out there, and you can see more detail about this. So this idea of collaborating together, coming up with a shared mind, so when someone puts the star next to that option, it's with an understanding because they have collaborated, they've reached this shared understanding that that is, in fact, the high value. Whoa, what is this? Some of you alluded to a number of these earlier. These are a variety of value tools that are out there. It's amazing. There are quantitative, qualitative tools that can be used. I'm sure some of you recognize a number of these. You use them yourself. Certainly the Kano model would have been really neat to use when we're thinking about some of those value considerations. How many folks have used that? Yeah, excellent. And then we heard purpose alignment model, the $100 allocation, all variety of things that could be used to help. And oftentimes when we grab one of these tools, remember, a fool with a tool is still a fool. We want to be really careful that we are prepared, and many times the foundation for doing this would be those value considerations, and then taking those features or options and using those. When we do have this need to converse about the options, we like to use what we call the structured conversation. A lot of times we have conversations and they aren't structured and we know what happens. So adding this lightweight framework to this. So the idea would be we expand our thinking. This one little nugget is possibly one chunky option, or it could even be a story. We explore what those possibilities are. That's wonderful. We brainstorm, we discover, that's lovely, but we don't have time, money, or resources to do them all. So guess what? To the rescue comes our value. Our value considerations serve as a filter or a sieve, and only the high value options are selected. That's in essence what you saw on the options board where someone went up and starred them. We also say that the conversation is not over. We don't leave, we don't hang up the phone, we don't leave the room until we have time to confirm our understanding. And the confirmation might be to write some examples or scenarios or user acceptance tests about that particular set of options. And sometimes it takes another pass through. It's not always the first iteration. We use the structured conversation at every view, the big view, the preview, and the now view. You notice that that value is right there. We can't have a good conversation. We can't have an effective conversation if we haven't prepared and have those value considerations in hand. Now, this part of, you'll see the whole model in just a few minutes, I'm just trying to show bits and pieces. This part of the model shows that when we actually have results, so we've selected certain high value options, we've delivered them, it's August 2013, we've delivered the first release. Ideally, within a month or 2 months, what happens? We have to go and measure. We have to find out, were those the right choices? Are they meeting those specific objectives? And it's a way of learning. Did we make the right choices? And if we did, great. If we didn't, in the next release, we've got to take select the options that would enable us to reach those objectives. So value-based decisions. They need to be clear, they need to be concise, they need to be continual. I would also say they need to be transparent. make sure they're collaborative. And this last piece, it's not just based on dollars. These value-based decisions, I was actually on a webinar recently, and another person was arguing, we were arguing, I have to admit I was arguing. We didn't get to mud wrestling because it was a webinar, but almost, because she said every value decision is based ultimately on money. And I don't agree. I think that there are actually intrinsic aspects. You could take it and say, if you didn't have brand loyalty, what would that mean ultimately? You might get to some dollar amount, but I think it would be very difficult to measure. So being clear that some of those decisions are not always going to be defended by how much money we made or how much money we saved. So our wrap, here's the entire model. We started out with our ends in the upper left-hand corner with the vision, goals, and objectives. And we said that those are going to be delivered by the product itself. Those product options are going to actually be assessed using that whole aspect of the evaluation subset. And when we make that evaluation, that value decision has to be aligned with those vision, goals, and values, objectives. And then not forgetting right in the heart, notice right in the heart of this, that we look and say, yes, we actually have to, as we just saw, validate those actual results. We don't know value until we don't know if we've reached that value until we've done that validation. Yes?
One question is, the two crow's feet, that one says ways and the other says impacts, why are they pointing in opposite directions? Because I thought it'd be a flow from one end to the other.
So the idea that this value consideration, these benefits and risks could impact these value considerations. So there are multiple ways of looking at that. That's a good point. So now to wrap up, I'd like you to revisit the stapled sheet that you have. And I'd like you to see if there's anything you might add to your value tools and techniques, or who you perceive now to be your decision makers who would participate. So I'd like you to spend about 3 minutes seeing if there are any more you could add. We have the answer here for them, right? Thanks a lot.